Story 1. The woman on the sidewalk was smiling, but her face was completely still. This happened to me in 2017, in a town that always looked washed out, even when it wasn't raining. I was living in a studio apartment on the west end of Richmond, Virginia. It was my first year working night shifts for a roadside assistance company. Basically, I was on call from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., ready to drive out and help people whose cars had broken down. That November, we got a stretch of cold, constant rain. The kind that doesn't thunder, just falls endlessly, like a white noise you can't turn off. Most nights were boring. I'd sit in my van in the company parking lot, listening to AM radio or flipping through call logs. But one night around 2:30 a.m., I was asked to assist someone whose car had stalled on a neighborhood street just off Patterson Avenue. I got the address, punched it into GPS, and headed out. The road was mostly residential. 2-story homes, each with tiny square lawns and street lamps, spaced just far enough apart to make the gaps feel darker. I pulled up alongside the stalled car, hazards blinking. No one was in it. I turned on my high beams, stepped out into the cold drizzle, and knocked on the closest door. No answer. The tow wasn't urgent, so I waited a bit in the van, engine idling, windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically. That's when I saw her. She was standing across the street under a leaning, flickering street lamp, maybe 30 feet away, black raincoat, hood up, still, facing the road. I assumed she was the one who had called, so I opened the door and waved. She didn't wave back, but something else moved. There was a puddle beneath the street lamp. Rain had collected unevenly on the cracked pavement. Her reflection rippled as expected, but then it tilted its head. I blinked, looked again. Her body hadn't moved, still straight, face hidden in the shadow of her hood. But the puddle showed her head slightly tilted to the side, like someone trying to listen in. Then it straightened again. I stared, frozen in the driver's seat. The windshield wipers beat once. Then again. I looked back at her, the real her. Nothing, no motion, just her shape against the streetlight. But in the puddle, another tilt. I leaned forward, squinting. The rain made it hard to be sure of anything. I told myself maybe the ripple had distorted her shape. Maybe a passing car had disturbed the water. I turned the engine off and got out again. She didn't react. Not to the slam of the van door, not to my steps on the wet pavement. Her hands were at her sides. She wasn't even looking at me. And I realized something else. She was smiling. Not smiling like she had seen me. Her mouth was just stuck that way, wide. Still, unmoving. It didn't fit the rest of her. Too bright, too frozen. I called out, "Are you the one who called for assistance?" She didn't respond. I crossed the road slowly, my boots splashing in the shallow puddles. As I got closer, I could see her face better. That smile didn't shift, didn't waver. Her eyes were not focused on me, not on anything. They didn't even blink. She wasn't right. Something in me knew it, that pre-language kind of knowledge you feel in your spine. I stopped walking. The puddle at her feet was larger now, swollen from the falling rain, and in the reflection her head turned directly toward me, not a tilt, a full turn, eyes locked on mine. I looked up. Her real head hadn't moved. I stumbled back a step, heart thudding. The puddle face moved again, closer to me now, but the woman, the actual figure, was completely still. I backed away, crossed the street without turning around, got in the van, locked the door. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the rain and the steady click of my hazard lights. When I looked up again, she was gone. Not walked away, just gone. The puddle was still there, shining like glass. Nothing around it. I stayed in the van until sunrise. When I finally stepped outside again, I walked across the street. There was no trace of her. But where she had stood, the concrete was dry, perfectly dry, like it had been under shelter the entire night. I never told the company what I saw. I just marked the job, "No client found," and drove home in silence. 2 weeks later, it rained again, and I started seeing her, the same woman, not always directly, but always there. It started small. I'd be driving a job on the outskirts of town, and in the corner of my side mirror, I'd catch a glimpse. Someone in a black raincoat on the sidewalk, standing still, not waving, just watching. She never moved, at least not when I looked directly. But when I looked away and looked back, she was closer. It happened again on Route 33. I was coming back from a tow at around 4 a.m. It was raining hard, visibility low. I slowed at a red light and checked the mirrors. She was standing on the grassy median behind me, one car length back, no umbrella, head slightly tilted. I stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her real face was too shadowed to see clearly, but in the glass, that same expression, that frozen smile, unblinking. The light turned green. I accelerated quickly. At the next light I looked again. She was closer, 10 feet behind the van, still standing, still smiling. My mouth was dry. I turned the music off, turned the heat down. The windshield fogged over in a wave, and I wiped it with my sleeve. The third light was red again. This time I didn't want to look, but I did. She was directly behind the van now, her coat dripping, her reflection in the glass, clearer than it should have been. Her face was different this time, still smiling, but something in the eyes had changed, sharper, focused, like she was waiting for something. I slammed the gas before the light turned green. I drove through the intersection and didn't slow down. I weaved through lanes, made sharp turns, trying to lose her, even though I never saw her move. When I finally pulled into a Wawa parking lot, I stayed in the van. Rain thudded on the roof. My breath fogged the cabin. I didn't want to look behind me. But I did. She wasn't there. I exhaled. My hands shook. I started the engine to drive away. Then I saw them on the rear window, 2 wet handprints, one high up, one lower, like she had pressed her face and palms against the glass and just stood there, watching. I started doing research, not because I thought it would help, but because I needed something. An answer, a word, anything. I found obscure blogs, dead forums, threads on old paranormal boards, mostly abandoned. But one phrase kept coming up: mirror projection entities. According to the posts, these aren't ghosts, they're impressions, fragments of perception that mirror not what is real, but what your mind cannot admit it's already seen. Most sightings occur in high refraction conditions: heavy rain, wet pavement, standing water, all environments where reflections are slightly distorted, slightly delayed. They said the projections often appear first in mirrors, windows, puddles. They said they appear first to the person who sees them. You saw me first. I read that line in a comment on an archived Reddit thread. No user name, just a story about a man who saw a woman in his mirror and couldn't get rid of her after that. I tried not to drive at night anymore, but my job didn't allow that, and eventually it happened again. I was driving near the canal one night, another call, another rainy stretch of road. I was alone on the highway, but I felt something was wrong. My windshield began to fog, not from the outside, but the inside. Like breath, like someone was inside the cabin, just out of view. I turned on the defroster. Nothing. The fog thickened until it obscured everything but the edges of the glass, and then I saw it, in the condensation, slowly forming. A message: you saw me first. I braked hard, turned the cabin light on, whirled around. No one was there. But the message stayed, perfectly written in the fog, like traced with a fingertip. I wiped it away. It came back, not right away, not even that night, but on other drives, other windows, always the same words. I started driving only during the day, requested a shift change, took a pay cut. It didn't help, because now I see her even when it's not raining, standing by the edge of buildings, reflected in puddles that shouldn't exist. Last week I woke up in my apartment. The mirror in the hallway was fogged. The words were there again, and this time below them, something new. I am still where you left me. I haven't driven since, but I keep seeing puddles, even when it hasn't rained in days. And in them, her face is always smiling, but her eyes, they're not mine. Story 2. The rain sound was coming from inside the house. This happened to me in 2021, the second winter after I bought the house. It was a single-level ranch style in rural Pennsylvania, built in the late 60s, nothing special. I'd moved there after a short-lived marriage ended, looking for something isolated and manageable, just a place I could fix up slowly and stay invisible for a while. The property backed into a tree line, not woods exactly, but dense enough to block wind and sound. Inside, it was dated, faded wallpaper, linoleum floors, old plumbing. But it was mine. I spent most evenings alone, reading or working on little projects. The house creaked sometimes, but nothing unusual, until the rain started. I first noticed it late one night in December. I was lying in bed, half awake, when I heard what sounded like soft rainfall, not against the windows, but somewhere deeper, inside, like it was coming from the walls, a constant, irregular patter. I got up, checked the front door, then the back, dry. I stood in the hallway and listened. The sound had no direction. It didn't come from above, or from any vent, or from the roofline. It was just present, all around, like the sound of water lightly falling on cardboard, repeating in no pattern, but not stopping either. I stood there for 5 minutes before talking myself out of it. I told myself maybe the old pipes were gurgling, or maybe it had started raining and I couldn't see the drops. I turned on the porch light. The ground was dry, no rain. Still, I slept with a towel under the bed that night, just in case. In the morning, the towel was dry. Everything was silent. 2 days later, it happened again. This time I heard it earlier, around 11 p.m., while I was in the living room. I muted the TV and leaned forward. The rain sound was there, light, uneven. And again, with no clear origin. Not outside, not the roof, not a leak. It sounded close. But when I walked through the house, the volume never changed. It just followed me. I opened every door, checked every corner. Nothing. No wet patches, no drips, no storm outside. That's when I decided to record it. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table with the voice recorder on. I left it running for 5 minutes while I walked around. Then I sat down and played it back. I didn't hear rain in the recording. Instead, I heard something else. It took me a minute to understand it. It was quiet, subtle, but unmistakable once I noticed. A soft tapping in sets of 3, then a pause, then again. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. No pattern in length or rhythm, but always 3. I sent the clip to a friend of mine who works with sound design. I asked him if it was plumbing, maybe insects, some kind of hardware interference. He messaged back an hour later. "This isn't rain," he said. "It's too low frequency. There's a delay loop, like something mechanical, or someone repeating the same movement over and over." He asked if I lived near a factory. I didn't. The closest industrial site was miles away. I told him it must have been something in the walls, old ducts or rodents, but even as I typed it, I didn't believe it, because when I listened again, I heard something new in the background. A breath, just once, soft, close to the mic, almost like someone whispering from across the room, but no words, just the exhale. By the second week of January, the sound became nightly, always after 11 p.m., always the same rhythm. Soft pattering that didn't match the weather. Then something new started happening. I woke one morning to find the hallway floor wet, not soaked, just small droplets spaced evenly along the edge near the ceiling. I followed the trail to where the wall met the hallway closet. I opened the closet. Empty. Dry. I climbed up to check the attic. I'd only been up there once before when I first moved in. Just dusty beams, insulation, and some ductwork. I opened the hatch and pulled myself up, but something was different. A corner of the attic had been cleared, the insulation moved aside, floorboards placed over the beams, as if someone had been standing there, pacing in a tight space. The dust was disturbed in a half circle. The boards creaked under my weight. I saw no leak, no moisture, just dark wood. Still, I laid down a towel in the hallway, right where the drops had been. The next morning, the towel had shifted, only by an inch or two, but it had moved. The wet spots were back, but in a different pattern, 3 dark spots, equidistant, as if someone had walked with wet feet and then stopped. I tried again. New towel, same place. Each morning, it moved slightly, always a few inches to the left. The water spots changed position too, now forming curved arcs, like the shape of someone turning. On the 4th morning, I took a pencil and marked the position of the towel on the floor. When I woke up, the towel had moved again. But something else had changed. The attic hatch was open, just a crack, but I hadn't touched it. I stood beneath it, listening. No sound, but I couldn't shake the sense that someone had been there, not just recently, but often, for longer than I'd noticed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway with a flashlight, waiting. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard it again, the rain sound. But this time, it was different. It wasn't ambient. It wasn't distant. It was right above me. And it wasn't falling. It was dripping, drip, drip, drip. Then silence, then 3 quick taps from inside the attic. I started looking into auditory hallucinations. There's a term for it, indoor storm syndrome. Not clinical, more a nickname in sleep research circles. People report hearing weather sounds inside their homes, storms, rainfall, thunder. Even when it's dry outside, it's associated with grief, stress, insomnia, supposedly harmless. But in a few rare cases, it progresses. One paper talked about weather reassignments. That's when the brain doesn't just misinterpret sounds, it rewrites spatial awareness. You don't just hear rain. You feel like the house is inside the rain, like you're inside the storm. One paragraph mentioned something else, that when the auditory cortex is overstimulated in sleep-deprived people, they begin associating patterns of breath with external environmental cues. They mistake the sound of breath, even someone else's, for environmental repetition, like water, like tapping. I stopped reading because it made too much sense. That night, I went up. It was 3:17 a.m. I climbed the attic ladder, flashlight clenched in one hand, a crowbar in the other. The air was colder up there, stale. I moved slowly, scanning the beam of light across the joists, the insulation, the boxes. Nothing. No animal, no leak, no wetness. But the floorboards were bare again, like something had walked them. I stepped forward, crouching. The sound was gone, just silence. And then, a drop, right onto my cheek. I flinched, wiped it with my sleeve. It wasn't water, it was warm. Not just that, it smelled faintly sour, not mold, not rot, breath, like someone had exhaled above me. I looked up. The ceiling was black, nothing visible. But I stayed still, holding my breath. One more drop landed on my hand. I recoiled, because this time I heard it too. An exhale, not loud, not human, but deliberate. I turned, scrambled down the attic ladder, and slammed the hatch shut. I nailed it closed the next day, bought new insulation, replaced drywall, covered the entire opening with furniture. I don't go near it anymore. But the rain sound still comes, not every night. Just when the house is very quiet, it starts faintly, and sometimes even now, I swear, I hear something beneath it. Not pipes, not breathing, just a whisper, one word, closer. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. He knocked on my door in the rain, but there were no footsteps. This happened in 2018. During the spring floods in Western Washington. I was living in a small rental house near Aberdeen, not far from the coast, surrounded by trees that always seemed to drip, even when it hadn't rained for days. The house was part of a 3-home cluster down a gravel offshoot that barely qualified as a road. The kind of place where you don't see neighbors unless you go looking. I'd moved there to finish a thesis. Isolation was supposed to help. It didn't. The knock came on the 3rd night of non-stop rain. I'd just turned off the kitchen light and was walking toward the living room. The sound was so sharp I thought a bird had flown into the glass. But it wasn't that. It was a knock. 3 of them. Deliberate. Slow. The front door. I stood still, waiting for a second round. Nothing. I walked to the peephole. The porch light was off, but the motion sensor should have triggered. It hadn't. I flipped the switch manually. The bulb clicked. Light spilled onto the porch. Empty. No one. I opened the door just enough to look out. Rain was falling hard. I stepped out slightly, barefoot on the wooden slats. Cold water sprayed sideways into the doorway. I looked left, then right. No one. But the knocking had been real. I was sure of it. The porch was wet, but something was off. There were no footprints, not on the steps, not on the deck. I checked the gravel in front of the porch. Saturated mud. Any weight would have left a mark. But there was nothing. No impressions, no sign of entry, no trail. I stepped back inside, confused. Locked the door. Told myself maybe it had been a branch, or the wind shifting the frame. Maybe I was tired. The storm distorted sound. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening it happened again. This time just after 2 a.m. 3 knocks. Identical. I froze. Didn't go to the door. Just stood in the hallway. No second round. I waited, staring at the locked deadbolt. No sound. No voice. Nothing. Then, after about 5 minutes, I stepped to the peephole. He was there. Not knocking, just standing. A man in a long black coat soaked to the knees. His hands were at his sides. His head tilted slightly down. I couldn't see his face clearly. The porch light backlit him too much. His hood was low, shadowing his eyes. But he wasn't looking at the door. He was facing it, but his eyes seemed closed. I watched, not breathing. He didn't move, didn't shift weight, just stood. And then, it was like he blinked, not with his eyes, but with his whole body. 1 second he was there, the next, he wasn't. No motion, no steps, no fade, just gone. I opened the door within 10 seconds, stepped out. Nothing. Again, no footprints, no marks in the mud, just the sound of rain, steady, endless. I stopped turning the porch light off after that. After the 3rd night of knocks, I bought a doorbell camera, cheap one, motion-triggered, Wi-Fi synced. It wasn't fancy, but it recorded in short clips and uploaded them automatically. I installed it the next day, checking the angles carefully. The lens had a fisheye distortion, but it covered the porch and half the gravel path. That night I stayed up watching the feed on my phone. Nothing happened until 2:13 a.m. No knock, no alert. But when I checked the timeline, there was a clip. 17 seconds. I played it. The footage showed the porch empty at first. Then, without transition, the man was standing at the door. Like a frame had skipped. Same black coat, same stillness. No sound but rain. He stood there unmoving for 8 seconds. Then he turned. But not like a person turning, no shoulder shift, no step. His body just pivoted unnaturally, like it had no joints. Then he began to move, not walking, sliding, backwards. His feet didn't lift, his coat didn't sway. He moved across the gravel without resistance, like a puppet pulled by a string, slowly, evenly, out of frame. At the edge of the porch light's reach, his head lifted, and the camera caught it clearly. He didn't have a face, just skin, smooth, pale, wet, except for the eyes, or where the eyes should have been. 2 perfect ovals filled with water, raindrops, streaming down but not breaking form, as if the face was holding the storm behind it. I watched the clip 15 times. The audio had one strange thing. Static at the moment he appeared, not gradual static, but a spike, like the mic had been overwhelmed by a frequency. I called the police that morning, showed them the footage. They watched it, twice, then asked if I'd staged it. I didn't argue. They wrote a report, told me to call if he came back. He did, every night for 5 nights after, but never knocked again, just stood, watched, left the same way, backwards. Each clip was slightly different. Sometimes he'd tilt his head, sometimes he'd lift his hand, but never knock, never gesture, never move like a person. And the worst one came on the 6th night. In that video, he didn't face the door. He faced the camera, right into the lens. The raindrops on his face weren't falling anymore. They were rising, like the tape was playing in reverse. But the audio wasn't. The rain kept falling down. Only his image moved backward. I didn't watch the rest of that clip. I deleted the app, unplugged the camera, started packing that night. I moved out 6 days later, rented a new place across the state, in a town with actual sidewalks, neighbors, traffic. Something I hadn't realized I missed. The new house was smaller, clean, bright walls, no trees pressing against the windows. It was dry when I arrived. The first night, I didn't unpack much. Just made a bed on the floor and turned on a white noise machine. I felt safe, disconnected, at least for a while. Around 10 p.m., the rain started. I hadn't checked the forecast. It came down slow at first, then steadier. I told myself it didn't matter. Different house, different space. The camera was gone. The door was new. At midnight, I went to the kitchen for water, and I stepped in something. It was cold, thin. I flipped the light on. A puddle. In the middle of the hallway. No leaking pipe. No track from the front door. No shoe prints. No trail. Just water. Shaped almost perfectly round. I cleaned it up, didn't speak, didn't think, sat on the edge of the mattress, waiting. Nothing else happened. The rain continued outside, steady, real. But just before 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not a message, an alert from the new security system I'd set up during the move. Front door motion detected, 2:13 a.m. There was no camera this time, just a chime. But the log was clear. Doorbell ring. No visual. No audio. I stepped slowly to the peephole. Heart pounding. The porch was empty. But the ground just beyond the light had changed. There were no footprints. But the rain was falling differently there, hitting something smooth, something vertical, like a coat, just outside the cone of light. And in the puddle on my doormat, I swear I saw two ovals ripple, one beside the other. Not falling, not floating, just waiting, like eyes behind glass. I closed the peephole and stepped back. Didn't open the door. Haven't opened it since. And now, every time it rains, there's a puddle waiting in the hallway, even when I haven't left the house, even when the door never opens. It's always the same size, same shape, same time. And every drop sounds like a knock, even when nothing hits the door.